Director General of UNESCO, Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My warmest thanks go to all of you who have received us so generously here in Hangzhou, our Chinese hosts, and our many friends from UNESCO. I'm honored by your invitation and pleased for this opportunity to talk about two subjects that are very close to my heart: culture and development. UNESCO is to be saluted for keeping the work of cultural development high on the international agenda. And I also want to recognize the important work that China has been doing in cooperation with UNESCO and through its own advances in cultural development. It is indeed striking to realize how many of UNESCO's World Heritage sites are here in China, with this beautiful city of Hangzhou high among them. We're deeply pleased to be here. I referred to culture and development a moment ago as two separate subjects. In fact, as your participation here attests, they are inextricably linked. It was not so long ago, however, that culture and development were not thought to be so compatible. Cultural heritage was often seen as a potential drain on fragile economies, even a barrier to modernization. The closer linking of culture with development grew initially, I believe, out of increasing respect for the pluralism of developing societies. We came to recognize, as UNESCO has emphasized, that one size simply does not fit all. And cultural diversity has thus become part of the development equation. My intention today, however, is not simply to talk about cultural adaptation as another component of general development. What I propose to discuss with you is how cultural heritage can itself be a trampoline for social and economic development. In the same way that agriculture, water resources, power supplies, or transportation systems have traditionally been perceived. Even in settings of abject poverty, cultural legacies, though once dormant, can become powerful catalysts for change. I propose to demonstrate that proposition by describing some experiences of the Arkan Development Network over the past 3 decades. More precisely, I will speak about our work in restoring historic buildings, as well as public and domestic spaces of cultural significance in the poorer parts of the world. I noted that UNESCO, in its background paper for this conference, suggested that, and I quote, "One of the identified gaps in the Millennium Development Goals was their focus on outputs rather than on processes. What has been described as a concern for what at the expense of how." My purpose, quite simply, is to talk to you about the how. Was a fading of cultural memory. The world was threatened by an enormous cultural disaster. Even worse, there were few resources for addressing this situation. Architectural thinking globally was dominated by Western industrial models. Islamic architecture itself was abandoning the heritage, its heritage, in the face of an all-consuming modernity. Our response to that situation began with the creation in 1977 of the Arkan Award for Architecture, dedicated to the renewal of this legacy. Soon afterward came the Arkan Trust for Culture, and under its aegis, the Arkan Historic Cities Program. Over the last 2 decades, this program has developed 20 major projects in 9 different countries, many of them at UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Each one has taken about 10 years to complete. In the process, we have worked with dozens of partners and thousands of local employees. The projects have attracted sizable collateral investments and millions of visitors. And they have helped reduce poverty and improve the quality of life in the affected communities and well beyond. In the last 10 years, capped investment in the Historic Cities Program reached $182 million. Almost 1/4 of that came from partner donors. These may not seem like overwhelming figures, but the multiplier effect has been prodigious. One of our first projects grew out of a seminar in 1984 about public spaces in large Islamic cities. We met in Cairo, the city that my ancestors, the Fatimid Caliphs, founded over 1,000 years ago. Over the centuries, an enormous dumping ground for debris had developed there, covering some 32 hectares. Almost unbelievably, it had never been built upon. In 2001, we undertook to transform that area into a state-of-the-art green space. And in 2005, a beautiful park was opened in the area of the Azhar. Adjoining the park, however, was one of Cairo's poorest neighborhoods, Dar al-Ahmar. Some 200,000 inhabitants have been living there for centuries amid the ruins of Cairo's oldest buildings. The project quickly became a great archaeological venture, uncovering and restoring ancient walls and gates, 6 historic mosques, and dozens of houses and palaces. Local residents were trained in restoration skills, and some 200 are now permanently employed at the site. Equally important, the work expanded into social dimensions, providing neighborhood education and health services, and a supportive microcredit program. Our approach from the outset was that each reconstruction project should include a broad plan for social development. We call the approach multi-input area development. Today, the entire area, once one of the most dense and impoverished urban agglomerations on the planet, has become a remarkable residential and cultural cityscape. In 2001, most inhabitants were squatters with no title to their property. Today, 24% have a legal title. Over the last decade, family earnings increased 1/3 faster than the whole of Old Cairo. Literacy rates climbed by 1/4. Meanwhile, the very nature of society has been transformed in an area where evil social habits have been perpetuated for generations. Al-Azhar Park, meanwhile, has attracted more than 13 million visitors. Let me now move on from Egypt to Afghanistan, where we have engaged in similar work, restoring 30 buildings, monuments and public spaces in the heart of Kabul. The focal point has been the historic Babur Gardens and the ancient mausoleum of Timur Shah. As in Cairo, we have also prioritized the regeneration of nearby neighborhoods. Since its completion in 2007, the Badi Babur monument and the surrounding gardens have attracted over 400,000 annual visitors, and similar efforts are also underway in the West Afghan city of Herat. And let me move, quite literally, from A to Z, from Afghanistan to Zanzibar, where my grandfather began to build schools over a century ago. In 1996, we developed with the Zanzibar government a master plan for the redevelopment of Stone Town. It involved restoring 11 historic buildings, creating a new Serena Hotel, rehabilitating Kelele Square, rebuilding and extending the old seawall, and revitalizing the nearby Forodani Park. And we hope too that it will lead to the creation of an Indian Ocean Maritime Museum celebrating Zanzibar's rich history as a crossroads of commerce and culture. But we need not confine this discussion to urban centers. Some of our most interesting work and challenges have come in the high mountain valleys of northern Pakistan. Few international travelers visit there today, but the area was once a critical link in the historic Silk Route. The cultural linchpin has been the restoration and repurposing of historic forts and palaces, watchtowers and mosques, homes and markets, expanding jobs and diversifying the economy. Here too, the inputs have been multiple. Innovations in water and land management, a revival of village organizations, and a productive infrastructure including roads, bridges, schools, and clinics. As you know, the mountain terrain not only separates northern Pakistan from neighboring regions, but it also isolates communities of each valley one from the other. And yet, as word of the restorations spread, people in other villages began to ask, how can we share in this work? It was a heartening example of regional cohesion growing out of cultural diversity. Another complex illustration is found in India. Our major restoration project in Delhi was conceived in 1997, marking the 50th anniversary of Indian independence. It focused on a proud historical symbol, the gardens of the tomb of the Emperor Humayun. The project combined disciplines such as archaeology, conservation science, soil analysis, stone carving, and hydraulic engineering, drawing as well on local artisanal skills. As a result, the special grandeur of past centuries is today part of public life. The life of the neighborhood has also been revitalized. Important initiatives in health, education, and sanitation grew out of our quality of life assessments, and we continue to monitor quality of life indices through baseline studies on a regular basis. The most recent news from India has also been encouraging. The government there has approved the creation at the redeveloped complex of an interpretation center designed to make its complex story more accessible for residents and visitors. The Delhi project extends over an area of some 100 hectares, 3 times the scale of the Cairo project. It is our largest development to date, and we have deliberated about its scale. Clearly, some projects will be too small to be worthwhile, but it is possible for projects to get too big, to become unmanageable, or to collapse under their own weight. What is always needed is a keen sense of proper scale. Let me move on. Complexity has been another central watchword for the historic city projects. In the country of Mali, for example, the restoration of the great mosque of Mopti involved close collaboration at all levels of government. It also drew on a wide range of professionals and craftspeople, architects and masons, plasterers, metal workers, electricians, and potters. Meanwhile, social inputs again complemented the construction work, including water and sewage networks, vocational training, and again, microfinance initiatives. The Great Mosque of Mopti is one of 3 ancient mud mosques that were restored in Mali, along with those at Djenné and Timbuktu. And yet another nearby project, the new Bamako National Park, is already receiving 500,000 visitors a year. I cite these examples: Cairo, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Zanzibar, Delhi, and Mali as case studies from our experience. I could mention as well the restoration of 3 ancient citadels in Syria, the forthcoming rehabilitation of Nairobi Central City Park in Kenya, as well as the Korok City Park in Tajikistan, and other projects from Mostar to Samarkand. For all of these journeys, the development process has been long and complex, but filled with stimulating lessons. Let me briefly summarize 5 minutes. First, these cultural projects depend upon an ethic of partnership. This means the traditional separation between public and private domains must be set aside. The concept of public-private partnership is an essential keystone for effective cultural development. The role of governments, including municipalities, is fundamental in providing what we term an enabling environment. But the public sector cannot do this work alone. A creative mix of participants is needed: corporations and development agencies, foundations and universities, individual donors, faith communities, and local community groups. I have one more comment to make about partnerships. It is absolutely essential that effective partnerships are maintained throughout the life of the project, including the post-completion period. And let me cite our own experience in support of this point. Of the 20 historic city projects that we have undertaken, only 2 have failed the test of time. But in both cases, what was missing was a strong partnership structure for post-project management. This discussion leads me to a second conclusion. While cultural development often begins with physical legacies, planning must focus well beyond the cultural goals. We cannot somehow assume that a favorable social and economic impact will flow naturally as a byproduct of cultural commitments. Issues relating to the quality of life must be considered from the beginning and monitored throughout the project's life. The third point in this list of lessons that we have learned is that the engagement of the local community from the earliest stages is imperative for success. Cultural endeavors in particular involve risks that go well beyond external economic factors. Their progress can depend heavily on variable qualities of human nature, including the pride and confidence of the peoples involved. In any development effort, there will be a tipping point along the way when we see the glass as half full rather than half empty. These tipping points are more likely to tip in the right direction when attention to local confidence has become an ingrained reflex. And there is a fourth point that is also special to historic restoration projects. And that is the fact that we can never be sure just what we will encounter as the work of rediscovery moves along. There are many unknowns going in, and we must be ready for surprises. I think, for example, of how little we knew when we started about the extent and condition of the Ayyubid wall in Cairo, buried for 500 years or more. The wall, in fact, had been so completely obscured that plans had been suggested for building a highway over it until its remains were identified. In this case, as in so many others, the resilience and adaptability of all the partners, including the people of the local neighborhoods, was critical. And let me finally highlight a fifth lesson. Planning for such projects must anticipate how they will operate on a continuing basis after they are completed. In many cases, a permanent service facility will be put in place. A site museum, perhaps, a scholarly center, a children's library, a training workshop, a clinical resource or research facility. Financial planning must take these opportunities into account as a set of costs, to be sure, but also a potential source of revenue. Upfront investment will be on everyone's mind at the start. But our financial strategies should include eventual income streams that will sustain the project over a long run. One of the least happy outcomes for any cultural initiative is that it becomes a net drain on the local population. And in this respect, I want to return to the example of Cairo because I think it is very illustrative of what can be achieved. There, Al-Azhar Park not only provides important employment for the community, both directly and indirectly, but it also attracts over 2 million visitors a year. And with these visitors comes a stream of revenues, fees and charges for entrance and for special events, licenses, parking fees, retail sales, and so on. The result is that the project now produces a surplus of some $800,000 a year. That surplus is then reinvested in the same area, helping to ensure long-term sustainability. I have summarized for you here a complex array of information, hoping that it may spur attention and interest, especially in discussing not only the what of cultural development, but also the how. Whether it be in Asia, Africa, or the Middle East, in high mountain or coastal areas, in urban or rural environments, in peaceful or post-conflict situations, the case is proven in my mind that cultural development can contribute in unique and distinctive ways to the human aspiration for a better quality of life. And that, of course, precisely should be the objective of the post-2015 development agenda. Thank you very much.